Imagine flying in a rickety biplane in the late 1920s. The desert winds of southern Peru pushing against the fragile wings, the sand stretching endlessly below like an ocean frozen in time. As you look down, the monotony suddenly breaks. Etched into the pale surface of the Pampa de Nazca, enormous shapes begin to reveal themselves, lines so straight they seem unnatural, geometric forms so vast that only from the air do they coalesce into meaning. A hummingbird stretching longer than a football field, a monkey coiled into a spiral, a spider with elongated legs, a condor spreading wings wider than a modern airplane. No walker on the ground could have seen these forms. They were never meant for the eyes of those bound to the earth. Their full majesty was revealed only from above, when human flight finally allowed us to look down at the desert as though through the eyes of gods. This is how the world came to rediscover the Nazca Lines, an accident of perspective, a trick of altitude. Archaeologist Toribio Mejia Cespe first reported seeing some of the lines in 1927 while walking across the surrounding hills. But it was not until the 1930s, when small planes flew commercial routes across southern Peru, that their vast scope stunned human imagination. Pilots returned wide-eyed, speaking of massive animals and symbols stretching across the desert floor. Some called them the world's largest drawings, others the greatest riddle of archaeology. The locals had always known of the lines, but only as scratches in the sand, too vast to recognize. From the ground they were invisible. From the air, they became revelation. Early theories swirled with wonder and uncertainty. Some scholars suggested they were ritual walkways, paths traced by the Nazca people in religious ceremonies. Imagine processions of men and women marching in single file along the lines, singing prayers to unseen gods. The desert floor became a stage, the lines pathways of devotion, etched into the earth as offerings. Others argued they pointed to underground water sources, essential for survival in this arid land. After all, the Nazca depended on fragile aqueduct systems called puquios, and water was sacred. To carve prayers into the desert itself might have been an act of desperate faith, an attempt to summon rain from the heavens or blessings from spirits below. The idea of astronomy soon emerged. For people who lived without electricity, the night sky was not just background. It was everything. It dictated planting cycles, festivals, and mythology. The Nazca, like many ancient cultures, must have lived in rhythm with the stars. Some researchers suggested the lines corresponded to constellations, vast drawings of animals reflected in both the desert and the heavens. The hummingbird might represent a constellation tied to fertility and rebirth. The spider could symbolize Orion or another celestial marker. The monkey's spiral tail might mirror the Milky Way's coiling arc. In this interpretation, the desert was not just land. It was a mirror of the cosmos, a map of the heavens written large enough for gods to read. Yet here lies the paradox. Why design figures so massive they could never be recognized from the ground? Why build a map that only the gods, or someone flying above, could see? This is the puzzle that transformed the Nazca Lines from archaeological curiosity to global enigma. Writers like Erich von Däniken inflamed imaginations in the 20th century, suggesting the lines were a star map for extraterrestrial visitors. According to this view, the desert was a kind of interstellar airport, with long, straight lines functioning as runways. To skeptics, it sounded absurd, but to millions of readers, the imagery was irresistible. The idea that the Nazca were guided by visitors from the stars turned the lines from silent drawings into messages across time and space. Consider how the desert itself participated in this secret. The Nazca region is one of the driest places on Earth. Rain is almost non-existent, wind minimal. The ground is coated in dark pebbles of iron oxide. When scraped away, they reveal the lighter soil beneath. With so little weathering, the lines remained intact for centuries, preserved like sacred scars. It was as if time conspired to protect them, guarding their message until the right moment. Until humans invented flight and finally looked down, the silence of the desert became the keeper of a secret too large to see, too quiet to hear, until technology unlocked its scale. Imagine those first pilots circling the desert with astonishment. From above, what looked like meaningless scratches on the ground exploded into form. A killer whale, a dog, a tree, a flower. Shapes impossible to perceive from below suddenly became undeniable. What must it have felt like to be the first in over 1,000 years to glimpse them in their totality, to realize you were seeing something ancient people had created, but perhaps never fully seen themselves. That experience must have felt almost supernatural, as though one had flown into a forgotten chapter of human history written across the sand. Theories multiplied with every new discovery. Some argued the lines were ritual calendars, pointing to the rising and setting positions of stars, solstices, or planetary events. Others claimed they were enormous ritual spaces, where shamans induced trance states by walking the lines, believing the geometric paths connected them to cosmic forces. Some saw in the figures totems of power, desert deities given monumental form, and still others imagined the lines as songs written into the earth, where walking the designs became a sacred chant, a hymn traced by human footsteps. But the alien theory, however controversial, captured the public imagination because of its poetic symmetry. Here were designs that made sense only from the sky, created by people who never flew. To believers in ancient astronaut hypotheses, this was no coincidence. Perhaps the Nazca were not drawing for themselves at all. Perhaps they were instructed or inspired by beings who descended from the stars. The lines were a communication system, a star map guiding visitors, or even a ritual offering meant to be seen by eyes from beyond. Whether fact or fantasy, the theory endures because it addresses the fundamental paradox. The Nazca Lines are art without an earthly audience. The fascination grew because the Nazca Lines sit at the edge of what we can explain, too vast for simple ritual, too abstract for pure utility, too deliberate to dismiss as random. The early theories, processional paths, water cults, astronomical calendars, all touch on pieces of truth, but none feel complete. Each explains part of the puzzle, but the full picture remains elusive. It is this very uncertainty that makes the discovery by air so haunting. The lines exist at the boundary between earth and sky, human and divine, science and myth. In rediscovering them, humanity was confronted not just with strange shapes in the sand, but with the possibility that history is far more layered than we think. The Nazca Lines force us to ask questions that cut deeper than archaeology. How did ancient people conceive of projects on such an immense scale? Why create something that required a perspective they supposedly never had? Were they reaching for gods, or signaling to something beyond our world? Were they praying to the sky, or mapping it? Or were they recording knowledge in a form only the universe itself could read? To imagine the discovery from the perspective of the locals adds another layer. Picture a farmer in the early 20th century, living near the desert, walking across the lines every day. To him, they are simply shallow furrows, insignificant scratches. Suddenly, foreign scholars and pilots arrive, speaking of giant animals, of mysteries written into the earth. What was invisible for generations becomes world-famous overnight. The land itself is redefined, transformed from barren desert into a cosmic message board. What must it have felt like to realize that what you considered lifeless ground was suddenly a treasure map of human history, coveted by the world? Some accounts from pilots tell us they nearly doubted their eyes. Shapes too perfect, distances too exact, symmetry too precise to be accidents. Some reported that from the air, the desert resembled a chart, a vast piece of cosmic geometry stretched to impossible proportions. These reactions themselves shape the theories. When observers are overwhelmed, their minds search for meaning, reaching toward the familiar, gods, stars, or otherworldly visitors. The birth of these theories reflects not only the Nazca's mystery, but also the human need to fit the incomprehensible into a narrative. Archaeologists in the mid-20th century attempted to restore rationality to the discussion. Maria Reiche, the German mathematician and archaeologist, devoted her life to measuring and studying the lines. She argued passionately that they were an astronomical calendar, aligning with solstices, equinoxes, and important celestial events. For decades she lived in Nazca, guarding the lines, sweeping sand off them with her broom, preserving them as best she could. To her, the lines were a message from an ancient civilization to the sky itself, a prayer written not in words but in geometry. Yet her work only deepened the mystery. Some of her measurements did show alignments, but others did not. Critics pointed out inconsistencies. Was it truly a calendar, or was she, like the rest of us, seeking order where none existed? This tension, between precision and ambiguity, between evidence and imagination, defines the Nazca Lines. Their discovery by air didn't just reveal them, it magnified their mystery, making them canvases for every human longing, from scientific explanation to cosmic myth. And the fact that Reich alone, with broom in hand, defended them for decades only added to their aura. What we know for certain is this: without flight, we might never have truly rediscovered them. Without altitude, they are scratches. With it, they are messages. The biplane pilots of the 1930s were the first to reopen a dialogue interrupted for centuries. In their astonishment, in their urgency to share what they saw, they gave the Nazca Lines back to the world. And in doing so, they invited us all to wrestle with a question that has no easy answer. Why would a civilization create a work of art so vast that only the heavens could see it? And still, there is something deeper in the rediscovery. The Nazca Lines remind us that human beings often create not just for themselves, but for an unseen audience. Sometimes that audience is divine, sometimes it is future generations, and sometimes it is beings we can scarcely imagine. The earliest theories, whether water rituals, astronomical calendars, or cosmic landing strips, reveal more about our need to interpret than about the Nazca themselves. Each theory is a mirror, reflecting human hopes and fears back at us. Consider the figures themselves. The monkey with its coiled spiral tail. Was it a symbol of infinity? Of cycles in nature? Of constellations winding endlessly in the night sky? The condor, wings spread wide across the earth, might have been the Nazca's earthly echo of a bird constellation overhead. The spider, carefully drawn with an anatomically precise detail only visible through magnification, hints at astronomical and biological knowledge intertwined. Each geoglyph tells a story, not just of animals in the desert, but of meanings layered in myth, sky, and ritual. Other cultures remind us that this interpretation is not far-fetched. The Maya carved star maps into stone, charting the movements of Venus. The Egyptians aligned their pyramids with Orion's belt, believing in a direct pathway between the pharaohs and the stars. Even Stonehenge in England, half a world away, stands as a monument that ties the earth to the heavens. Could the Nazca Lines have been South America's chapter in the same cosmic story? A civilization striving to inscribe its myths, fears, and hopes on the grandest canvas possible, the desert itself? The story of discovery by air is not finished. Even now, new lines are still being uncovered by drones and satellite imagery. What else lies beneath the sand, waiting for the right perspective? In a way, we are still those early pilots, still circling the desert in awe, still asking the same unanswerable question: who were the lines meant for? And perhaps, just perhaps, the answer is not meant to be known, only wondered at. For it is in the wondering that the lines retain their power, a power born in the desert but aimed forever at the stars. Stand on the desert floor of Nazca, and the world looks barren, almost empty. The sand stretches in every direction, flat, silent, unbroken. At your feet, shallow furrows run across the ground, but from where you stand, they mean nothing. They are scratches, lines without sense, marks that fade into the horizon without revealing their design. You could walk for miles along one of these grooves and never suspect that you were part of something greater. Never imagine that the path beneath your feet was the stroke of a colossal image. Only from the sky does the truth reveal itself. The scratches resolve into shapes, animals, spirals, arrows, straight lines running toward infinity. From above, they cohere. From above, they transform from random marks into deliberate symbols. This is the paradox of the Nazca Lines. Their meaning exists only when seen from a perspective their makers should never have had. They are art without an audience, geometry without a ground view. Why would an ancient civilization create images so vast, so complex, so utterly invisible from the human vantage? Some argue that the Nazca people believed gods lived in the sky, watching from above. To them, the lines were not meant for human eyes at all, but for divine ones. The hummingbird was a prayer written in earth, the spider an offering of fertility, the monkey a plea for abundance. By making the images so large, they ensured that their gods, high above in the heavens, could see their devotion. From the ground, the images were incomprehensible, but from the sky, from the perspective of deities, they became an act of worship, a communication across the void. Another possibility is that the very act of creating something incomprehensible from the ground was part of the ritual. To walk the lines, to trace the pathways, may have been a spiritual journey. Shamans, in altered states of consciousness, could have envisioned the whole pattern in their minds, even if their followers saw only pieces. Walking the lines was like chanting a prayer, one syllable at a time, without ever seeing the full sentence. Perhaps the purpose was not to see the whole design, but to embody it through movement, to become the pattern by living inside it. Yet, the paradox remains too sharp to ignore. These patterns only reveal themselves from above. Some researchers argue this is proof that the Nazca were reaching for something beyond their own world. The lines could be seen as a form of communication, a cosmic signal, a way of saying, "We are here." Much like modern humanity beams radio waves into space, hoping distant civilizations might hear, the Nazca may have carved messages visible only to those who look down from the heavens. The desert becomes a billboard for the universe, a silent transmission etched in dust. Consider the extraordinary precision required. Many figures span hundreds of meters. The straight lines stretch across valleys, so exact that even with modern surveying tools, they would be difficult to replicate. Without the ability to see them from above, how did the Nazca ensure accuracy? Some scholars suggest they used grids, stakes, and ropes, plotting each curve and line with meticulous care. But even if the technique can be explained, the motivation cannot. Why make art that no human eye could appreciate in full? Why devote centuries of labor to shapes hidden from sight? Imagine if you were part of the Nazca Society, tasked with helping draw one of these geoglyphs. You spend weeks clearing stones, aligning ropes, scraping the desert surface. You walk across lines so massive you cannot grasp their form. You ask yourself, what am I building? What is this for? And perhaps the answer comes not from the ground, but from the shaman who tells you, the gods will see it. Or perhaps the leader says, one day beings from the sky will know we existed. You cannot see the whole, but you trust that someone, something, can. The idea of perspective itself becomes central here. The Nazca Lines force us to confront the question, who is the audience of human expression? Most art is made for people to see, for tribes, for communities, for posterity. But the Nazca Lines seem to reject this. They are too large, too distant, too hidden from ground view. They challenge the assumption that art must be comprehensible to its creators. What if the act of creating something invisible was the point? What if the mystery was intentional? A gift to forces beyond human comprehension. Across cultures, we find echoes of this same phenomenon. The Great Pyramids of Egypt were aligned to cardinal directions, visible to the stars more than to their builders. The mounds of Cahokia in North America aligned with solstices, patterns only recognizable from above. Even Stonehenge, when viewed from the air, reveals geometries invisible from the ground. Time and again, ancient civilizations built structures that made sense only when seen from an elevated or celestial perspective. The Nazca Lines are the purest form of this idea, art made for a skyward gaze. But unlike pyramids or stone circles, the Nazca Lines are pure outlines. They are not monuments to be touched, not chambers to be entered, but drawings too large to behold. Their visibility only from the sky raises unsettling questions. Were the Nazca imagining gods flying above? Did they somehow intuit the possibility of flight? Or were they simply expressing a truth that they themselves could never see, leaving behind images that belonged more to the heavens than to the earth? And yet, perhaps the most haunting possibility is that the Nazca never intended for the lines to be seen as images at all. Perhaps the very notion of them being pictures is our own projection. To the Nazca, walking the lines, performing rituals upon them may have been enough. The aerial view, the recognition of animals and shapes, might be a modern illusion, a coincidence of human pattern seeking. In this view, the mystery deepens further. The lines are not for us, not for gods, not for aliens, but simply for the act of creation itself. Still, the fact remains. They do form images. They do align with celestial events. They do hold coherence only from above. Whether intentional or accidental, their aerial visibility cannot be dismissed. It is the paradox at the heart of Nazca, meaning that exists only from a distance, coherence visible only when you rise above. Perhaps this is why they fascinate us so deeply. They remind us of our own condition, that sometimes the patterns of our lives make no sense up close, but reveal themselves only when seen from a higher vantage. Think also of the psychological impact of invisibility. To create something so immense that no one could ever fully see it requires faith. Faith that the act of creation itself was enough, that visibility to human eyes was not necessary. This echoes across human history. Cathedrals built for gods, not people. Chants sung in languages no one understood, meant only for the divine ear. The Nazca Lines may represent the ultimate act of unseen devotion, an offering to the cosmos itself, whether or not anyone ever witnessed it. From a symbolic perspective, their invisibility may also represent humility. The creators knew they would never see the full picture, just as human beings never see the full meaning of their lives. The design is larger than the individual, larger than the community, perhaps larger than humanity itself. The fact that coherence exists only from above might have been the point, to remind mortals that ultimate meaning belongs to the heavens, not to those bound to the soil. The visibility from above also carries eerie modern parallels. Today, satellites orbit the Earth, photographing the very lines whose full shapes the Nazca never saw. Our modern gods are machines, and it is through them that we now perceive what was once hidden. The irony is sharp. The lines waited centuries for the invention of flight, then centuries more for the eye of orbiting satellites, before finally being revealed in their entirety. The fact that their meaning depends on technology that the Nazca never possessed makes them seem even more uncanny, as if they were waiting for us all along. The shapes themselves intensify the paradox. The monkey's spiral tail resembles galaxies or infinite cycles. The spider, associated with fertility, could symbolize the weaving of cosmic threads. The condor, lord of the skies, may have been intended as a messenger between worlds. All of them, when seen from above, carry mythic resonance, their bodies stretched across the desert like gods lying in the sand. To draw them at such scale was to join heaven and earth, to bind mythology with geography, to transform the desert into scripture. Other ancient builders did similar things, but rarely with such invisibility. The Mayans built temples aligned to star movements. The Egyptians aligned pyramids with celestial belts. But in those cases, the structures were visible, monumental, undeniable to the human eye. The Nazca, by contrast, built images hidden from their own sight, comprehensible only from impossible heights. This choice makes them unique, unmatched in world history. It is as if they wanted their works to exist in a dimension separate from themselves, belonging to eternity more than to their daily lives. And perhaps that is the final lesson of these patterns. They are a mystery about perspective. They remind us that truth often exists only at a higher vantage. From below, chaos. From above, order. From within, confusion. From afar, clarity. The Nazca Lines, in being visible only from above, are not just images in the desert. They are metaphors for existence itself. What seems random and meaningless in the details may, when viewed from a higher place, form a coherent pattern after all. This paradox echoes into our own age. Just as the Nazca carved messages meant to be seen only from above, humanity has launched its own invisible prayers into the sky. The Voyager spacecraft carries the golden record, etched with sounds and images of Earth, cast into the cosmos for unseen eyes. The Arecibo radio message was beamed into the void, a pattern only intelligible from afar. Like the Nazca, we create for audiences we may never meet, designing signals that only make sense from perspectives we cannot attain ourselves. And so, the Nazca Lines, visible only from the heavens, remain a reminder that not all meaning belongs to those who make it. Some creations are too vast for their makers, too profound for their own age. They are offerings to mystery itself, gifts to futures they could not imagine. Perhaps the Nazca never needed to see the full patterns, because they believed someone or something already could. And in that faith lies a truth still relevant today. Sometimes, the greatest works of humanity are those meant not for human eyes at all, but for eternity. The Nazca Desert is not only a place of silence, but of precision. Every line carved into the sand whispers of measurement, alignment, and intention. At first glance, the lines seem chaotic, sprawling like an accidental network of scratches. But hidden within them is geometry, orientation, and the mathematics of the sky. Many researchers, peering through the vast web of geoglyphs, have noticed that some lines converge toward the horizon exactly where the sun rises or sets on the solstices. To the Nazca, who lived in one of the driest environments on Earth, the arrival of the rainy season was a matter of survival. What better way to anticipate the rains than to watch the heavens, to trace the cycles of sun and stars, and to carve them permanently into the earth? Picture the solstice, the longest day of the year, the sun standing still before it begins to reverse its path. On that day, in the Nazca Desert, the light aligns perfectly with certain lines, casting shadows that transform the flat desert into a celestial clock. These were not decorations. They were instruments. The desert was a giant observatory, the lines stretching like cosmic needles toward the points where the heavens delivered their promises. If the rains would come, it would be after these moments, when the sun signaled the shift in seasons. The Nazca had no mechanical calendars, no written charts. Their record was the land itself, and the sky was its key. Some lines, archaeologists argue, align with specific constellations. The Pleiades, a cluster of stars revered across cultures, seems to have been among them. The Pleiades marked planting and harvesting in many ancient societies, from the Greeks to the Mayans, and its appearance in the sky would have told the Nazca that it was time to sow or reap. Imagine them gazing upward at the faint glittering cluster, then downward at their desert inscriptions, seeing the two as mirrors of one another. Above, the stars scattered in the heavens. Below, the line stretched across the earth. It was as if the Nazca wanted to pull the stars down, anchor them to their world, and ensure that the cycles of heaven were never forgotten. Theories even suggest alignments with Orion's belt, the three stars that form one of the most recognizable features in the sky. Orion has been central to mythologies around the world: Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, and perhaps Nazca was no different. Some geoglyphs point toward the setting of these stars. Why? Perhaps Orion was a marker for the rainy season, or perhaps it symbolized a cosmic hunter whose presence meant fertility. If so, then each line was not just a path, but a sight line, a cosmic pointer guiding the gaze toward a particular star, a particular promise. The desert became both compass and calendar, reminding the Nazca that survival depended not only on human effort, but on the rhythms of the heavens. It is also possible that the Nazca Lines functioned like a giant almanac, a record of cycles across years and decades. Some scholars suggest that certain trapezoids or wide-open spaces carved into the desert floor were used for observing lunar standstills, rare events where the moon rises or sets at its extreme limits over an 18.6-year cycle. For a society so dependent on seasonal change, to track such long-term celestial rhythms would have been extraordinary. It would mean that the Nazca were not only watching the immediate cycles of planting and rain, but measuring time on a scale that stretched beyond a single lifetime. They were embedding themselves in cosmic time, aligning human existence with celestial eternity. The choice of the desert as canvas may not have been accidental. The flat, dry, nearly featureless pampa was a perfect place to transform into a giant blackboard for the sky. The lack of rain preserved the lines, while the openness allowed alignments to be seen clearly. Imagine a priest or shaman standing at the end of a line during a solstice sunrise, the golden disk lifting over the horizon, exactly in line with the pathway carved into the sand. To the community gathered, this would not be mere coincidence. It would be proof that the lines were messages from the gods, or from something beyond. The alignment was not just science, it was revelation. But the Nazca's connection with the heavens may have gone deeper still. Some anthropologists argue that the lines were not only practical calendars, but spiritual bridges. To walk them was to enter a dialogue with the cosmos. Each step along a solstice line was a reenactment of the sun's journey, a ritual synchronization between body and sky. The people did not merely watch the heavens, they embodied them. By walking in patterns that mirrored the stars, they participated in the eternal dance of the universe. The desert became choreography, and the dancers were the Nazca themselves. This idea resonates with other ancient civilizations. At Stonehenge, stones mark solstice sunrises and lunar cycles. In Egypt, pyramids align with stars. In Central America, temples were built to catch the exact moment of equinox sunlight. The Nazca, without massive stone monuments, used the earth itself as their structure. Their stones were not raised, they were removed, scraping the desert surface to reveal the lighter soil beneath. Where others built upward, they carved outward. Yet the intent was the same: to make human life resonate with celestial cycles, to prove that the world below was a reflection of the world above. Consider also the emotional weight of these alignments. In an environment so harsh, so unpredictable, the Nazca needed assurance that life would continue. To see the sun align with their lines, to witness the Pleiades return at the expected time, must have filled them with a sense of order, of predictability, of cosmic protection. The stars became guardians, their return proof that the gods had not abandoned them. Every alignment was a covenant, every cycle a promise renewed. The desert lines were not just scientific instruments, they were prayers etched into the land, cosmic petitions stretching toward eternity. And yet, there lingers a deeper question. Why make the alignments so vast, visible only from above? If the purpose was only to track solstices or stars, smaller markers would have sufficed. But the Nazca chose scale, grandeur, immensity. Perhaps they believed the gods themselves looked down, reading these lines as messages. Or perhaps they imagined visitors, not of earth, but of sky, who would recognize the alignments, who would see from above what humans could barely perceive from the ground. The desert was not just a calendar. It was a billboard to the heavens, declaring both knowledge and devotion. This is where the Nazca Lines straddle the border of science and mystery. To archaeologists, they may be instruments of timekeeping, practical aids to agriculture. To the Nazca, they were surely more. They were bridges to the gods, reminders that the cosmos was alive, that every cycle mattered, that human survival was woven into the turning of the stars. And to us, they remain enigmatic. Were they calendars? Were they offerings? Were they messages? Perhaps all at once. Perhaps the truth lies not in choosing one theory, but in understanding that for the Nazca, there was no separation between practical and sacred. To watch the stars was to survive. To align the sun was to worship. To carve the earth was to pray. In this way, the Nazca Lines remain among the greatest mysteries of human history. They are at once observatories and sanctuaries, calendars and cathedrals, scientific instruments and cosmic art. They remind us that long before telescopes, long before written astronomy, people were already watching, already measuring, already embedding themselves in the rhythms of the heavens. And they remind us that for the Nazca, the desert was not empty. It was alive, resonating with the sky, pulsing with cycles of time, echoing with prayers that stretch still into the silence of eternity. When you look at the Nazca Desert from above, the animals emerge like ghosts, impossibly large and perfectly formed. A hummingbird with wings outstretched, a monkey with a coiled tail, a spider stretched thin with delicate legs, a condor soaring across the desert floor, a killer whale, a dog, even a human-like figure staring outward. For decades, these forms were treated as mysteries of design, symbols of worship, or acts of art. But what if they are more than just drawings? What if they are the reflection of the stars themselves, constellations projected onto the desert, animal spirits written not in light but in earth? The idea that humans project animals into the night sky is not unique to Nazca. Across the world, people have looked up at the scatter of stars and seen patterns, stories, living beings. To the Greeks, Orion was a hunter. To the Chinese, the stars formed celestial animals guarding the heavens. To the Incas, the dark patches of the Milky Way were llamas and serpents. We have always looked up and seen ourselves, or the creatures around us, woven into the heavens. So when the Nazca carved their animals into the desert, perhaps they were not just depicting the world below. Perhaps they were mapping the world above, creating a mirror between earth and sky. Consider the hummingbird. Tiny, delicate, a creature that seems more spirit than flesh. Its geoglyph stretches for hundreds of feet, wings open as if in flight. Some researchers suggest that this shape may correspond to a cluster of stars, a constellation visible to the Nazca as a bird darting across the firmament. In Andean mythology, hummingbirds were messengers between worlds, flitting between flowers, between life and death, between earth and the divine. If the Nazca saw a pattern of stars as a bird, inscribing that bird into the desert would have been a way of honoring the cosmic messenger, binding heaven's symbol to the earth below. Then, there is the monkey. Drawn with a coiled spiral tail, its body distorted yet intentional. Spirals themselves are ancient symbols of eternity, cycles, and the path of the cosmos. To some, the monkey geoglyph may represent a constellation linked to fertility rituals or seasonal cycles. In Incan myths, monkeys were tricksters, but also symbols of playfulness, chaos, and transformation. The monkey's spiral tail etched into the earth could have mirrored the winding path of a constellation or the apparent spiral of stars across the sky during long nights of observation. Imagine lying in the desert, watching the heavens spin slowly over hours, the Milky Way curling like the tail of a cosmic animal. To carve that eternal rotation into the earth would be to remind future generations that what spins above also shapes life below. The spider is another enigma. To modern eyes, it seems almost alien, its thin legs stretched far out into the desert, fragile yet unmistakable. But in Nazca belief, spiders were not simply insects. They were connected to water, fertility, and the cycles of rain, the most sacred of gifts in the desert. Astronomers have suggested that the spider may have been associated with the constellation Orion, or with star clusters tied to seasonal rains. The Nazca may have believed that by inscribing the spider in the desert, they were anchoring the cosmic sign of fertility to their land, ensuring that water would return year after year. To walk along the spider's legs during rituals would have been to enter into the body of the constellation itself, to walk inside the promise of renewal. The condor, immense and majestic, spreads its wings across the desert as though preparing to take flight into the sky. In Andean cosmology, the condor was a sacred bird, the messenger of the gods, capable of flying between the earthly and celestial realms. It symbolized the upper world, the heavens, and the spirits that dwelled there. Some researchers suggest that the condor geoglyph may have been aligned with constellations marking the path of the Milky Way, which itself was seen by many South American cultures as a celestial river. The condor etched on the ground may have been both symbol and guide, pointing toward where its counterpart soared eternally among the stars. To the Nazca, the condor was not just a bird. It was a cosmic traveler whose presence meant communication between humanity and the heavens. Other figures add to this mysterious map. The killer whale, a creature of the sea, may seem strange in a desert, but for the Nazca, it carried profound meaning. Whales represented power, transformation, and perhaps the underworld. Could it have mirrored a constellation along the horizon, its outlines seen in stars rising and setting? The dog, etched with simplicity yet power, might have been a guardian figure, tied to constellations associated with loyalty and vigilance. Even the so-called astronaut figure, with its strange humanoid features, raises questions. Was it a depiction of a deity, a mythological being? Or was it, like other human-like constellations across the world, a projection of humanity into the stars, a reminder that we too are written into the fabric of the cosmos? If these animals are indeed constellations, then the Nazca Desert becomes more than art. It becomes a star map, an atlas of the heavens inscribed on the earth. To walk among these figures was to journey through the sky itself, to place one's body within the constellations, to be both participant and witness in a cosmic dialogue. Imagine a procession at night, torches flickering, priests and villagers walking along the lines of the hummingbird or condor, chanting prayers. Above them, the stars of those same animals glimmered, mirrored in the sky. The people became part of a ritual that united heaven and earth, collapsing the distance between human life and celestial eternity. The choice of animals may have also carried a deeper layer of meaning. Each one embodied qualities necessary for survival: the hummingbird's endurance, the monkey's fertility, the spider's link to rain, the condor's link to the gods. To inscribe these creatures was to ensure that their powers were not forgotten, that they would bless the people year after year. By aligning them with constellations, the Nazca tied survival to the rhythms of the sky. When the stars of the spider rose, it meant rains might come. When the hummingbird's stars appeared, it was time for offerings. The desert became not just a temple, but a celestial instruction manual, guiding a people who depended on fragile cycles of water, crops, and cosmic order. This practice echoes cultures across the world. The Greeks named their constellations after animals and heroes, embedding myth into the stars. The Egyptians aligned their pyramids with Orion and Sirius. The Maya tracked Venus and embedded its cycles into their temples and glyphs. Everywhere, Ancient peoples looked upward and drew meaning. The Nazca, in turn, looked upward and then downward, etching those same meanings into the land. Where others raised stone monuments, the Nazca carved the desert floor. Their animals were not merely for earthly eyes, they were for the gods above, or for visitors who might see from the sky. But why animals, and not geometric shapes alone? Perhaps because animals carried stories. Humans remember stories more than numbers, beings more than abstractions. A line pointing to the solstice might be forgotten, but a condor spreading its wings? That is unforgettable. A spider with endless legs? That is a story. The Nazca encoded the sky not in equations, but in narratives, embedding meaning into creatures everyone could recognize. In this way, the constellations became alive, approachable, sacred. They were not distant stars, but familiar friends, guardians of survival, storytellers of the heavens. And so, when we stand today and gaze at these enormous figures, we are perhaps seeing what the Nazca saw. We are standing in the middle of a star map, surrounded by constellations, caught between the earth and the sky. The desert becomes a mirror, and the stars above are reflected below. The animals dance across both realms, eternal, bridging the gap between survival and myth, between human life and the infinite night. What once guided the Nazca still whispers to us that the heavens are not empty, that every flicker of light is a story, and that to survive in this world, one must learn to walk not just on the earth, but within the stars themselves. When you look at the Nazca Desert from above, the animals emerge like ghosts, impossibly large and perfectly formed. A hummingbird with wings outstretched, a monkey with a coiled tail, a spider stretched thin with delicate legs, a condor soaring across the desert floor, a killer whale, a dog, even a human-like figure staring outward. For decades, these forms were treated as mysteries of design, symbols of worship, or acts of art. But what if they are more than just drawings? What if they are the reflection of the stars themselves, constellations projected onto the desert, animal spirits written not in light but in earth? The idea that humans project animals into the night sky is not unique to Nazca. Across the world, people have looked up at the scatter of stars and seen patterns, stories, living beings. To the Greeks, Orion was a hunter. To the Chinese, the stars formed celestial animals guarding the heavens. To the Incas, the dark patches of the Milky Way were llamas and serpents. We have always looked up and seen ourselves, or the creatures around us, woven into the heavens. So when the Nazca carved their animals into the desert, perhaps they were not just depicting the world below, perhaps they were mapping the world above, creating a mirror between earth and sky. Consider the hummingbird. Tiny, delicate, a creature that seems more spirit than flesh. Its geoglyph stretches for hundreds of feet, wings open as if in flight. Some researchers suggest that this shape may correspond to a cluster of stars, a constellation visible to the Nazca as a bird darting across the firmament. In Andean mythology, hummingbirds were messengers between worlds, flitting between flowers, between life and death, between earth and the divine. If the Nazca saw a pattern of stars as a bird, inscribing that bird into the desert would have been a way of honoring the cosmic messenger, binding heaven's symbol to the earth below. Then there is the monkey, drawn with a coiled spiral tail, its body distorted yet intentional. Spirals themselves are ancient symbols of eternity, cycles, and the path of the cosmos. To some, the monkey geoglyph may represent a constellation linked to fertility rituals or seasonal cycles. In Incan myths, monkeys were tricksters, but also symbols of playfulness, chaos, and transformation. The monkey's spiral tail etched into the earth could have mirrored the winding path of a constellation, or the apparent spiral of stars across the sky during long nights of observation. Imagine lying in the desert, watching the heavens spin slowly over hours, the Milky Way curling like the tail of a cosmic animal. To carve that eternal rotation into the earth would be to remind future generations that what spins above also shapes life below. The spider is another enigma. To modern eyes, it seems almost alien, its thin legs stretched far out into the desert, fragile yet unmistakable. But in Nazca belief, spiders were not simply insects. They were connected to water, fertility, and the cycles of rain, the most sacred of gifts in the desert. Astronomers have suggested that the spider may have been associated with the constellation Orion, or with star clusters tied to seasonal rains. The The Nazca may have believed that by inscribing the spider in the desert, they were anchoring the cosmic sign of fertility to their land, ensuring that water would return year after year. To walk along the spider's legs during rituals would have been to enter into the body of the constellation itself, to walk inside the promise of renewal. The condor, immense and majestic, spreads its wings across the desert as though preparing to take flight into the sky. In Andean cosmology, the condor was a sacred bird, the messenger of the gods, capable of flying between the earthly and celestial realms. It symbolized the upper world, the heavens, and the spirits that dwelled there. Some researchers suggest that the condor geoglyph may have been aligned with constellations, marking the path of the Milky Way, which itself was seen by many South American cultures as a celestial river. The condor etched on the ground may have been both symbol and guide, pointing toward where its counterpart soared eternally among the stars. To the Nazca, the condor was not just a bird, it was a cosmic traveler whose presence meant communication between humanity and the heavens. Other figures add to this mysterious map. The killer whale, a creature of the sea, may seem strange in a desert, but for the Nazca, it carried profound meaning. Whales represented power, transformation, and perhaps the underworld. Could it have mirrored a constellation along the horizon, its outlines seen in stars rising and setting? The dog, etched with simplicity yet power, might have been a guardian figure, tied to constellations associated with loyalty and vigilance. Even the so-called astronaut figure, with its strange humanoid features, raises questions. Was it a depiction of a deity, a mythological being? Or was it, like other human-like constellations across the world, a projection of humanity into the stars, a reminder that we too are written into the fabric of the cosmos? If these animals are indeed constellations, then the Nazca Desert becomes more than art. It becomes a star map, an atlas of the heavens inscribed on the earth. To walk among these figures was to journey through the sky itself, to place one's body within the constellations, to be both participant and witness in a cosmic dialogue. Imagine a procession at night, torches flickering, priests and villagers walking along the lines of the hummingbird or condor, chanting prayers. Above them, the stars of those same animals glimmered, mirrored in the sky. The people became part of a ritual that united heaven and earth, collapsing the distance between human life and celestial eternity. The choice of animals may have also carried a deeper layer of meaning. Each one embodied qualities necessary for survival: the hummingbird's endurance, the monkey's fertility, the spider's link to rain, the condor's link to the gods. To inscribe these creatures was to ensure that their powers were not forgotten, that they would bless the people year after year. By aligning them with constellations, the Nazca tied survival to the rhythms of the sky. When the stars of the spider rose, it meant rains might come. When the hummingbird's stars appeared, it was time for offerings. The desert became not just a temple, but a celestial instruction manual, guiding a people who depended on fragile cycles of water, crops, and cosmic order. This practice echoes cultures across the world. The Greeks named their constellations after animals and heroes, embedding myth into the stars. The Egyptians aligned their pyramids with Orion and Sirius. The Maya tracked Venus and embedded its cycles into their temples and glyphs. Everywhere, ancient peoples looked upward and drew meaning. The Nazca, in turn, looked upward and then downward, etching those same meanings into the land. Where others raised stone monuments, the Nazca carved the desert floor. Their animals were not merely for earthly eyes, they were for the gods above, or for visitors who might see from the sky. But why animals, and not geometric shapes alone? Perhaps because animals carried stories. Humans remember stories more than numbers, beings more than abstractions. A line pointing to the solstice might be forgotten, but a condor spreading its wings? That is unforgettable. A spider with endless legs? That is a story. The Nazca encoded the sky not in equations, but in narratives, embedding meaning into creatures everyone could recognize. In this way, the constellations became alive, approachable, sacred. They were not distant stars, but familiar friends, guardians of survival, storytellers of the heavens. And so, when we stand today and gaze at these enormous figures, we are perhaps seeing what the Nazca saw. We are standing in the middle of a star map, surrounded by constellations, caught between the earth and the sky. The desert becomes a mirror, and the stars above are reflected below. The The animals dance across both realms, eternal, bridging the gap between survival and myth, between human life and the infinite night. What once guided the Nazca still whispers to us that the heavens are not empty, that every flicker of light is a story, and that to survive in this world, one must learn to walk, not just on the earth, but within the stars themselves. In the silence of the Nazca Desert, where the wind whistles through canyons of stone and the sun scorches the earth into a pale mirror, myths were born that reached beyond the human. The Nazca were not alone in this. Across ancient civilizations, stories of sky gods and flying serpents echoed like shared dreams scattered across continents. But here, among the lines etched into the desert, those myths seem almost alive, as though the very earth had been carved to summon the beings who once crossed between heaven and earth. To the Nazca, the sky was not an empty void. It was populated, inhabited, alive with presences that could see, descend, and alter the destiny of those below. Legends speak of gods who came from above, not simply as distant stars, but as forces that intervened in human life. For the Nazca, survival depended on water in a land almost devoid of it, and so many of their myths revolved around beings who controlled rain, storms, and rivers. One such being often depicted in Nazca art is the mythical serpent, sometimes feathered, sometimes winged, a creature that slithered through clouds as easily as it coiled through the underworld. To invoke the serpent was to speak to a cosmic bridge, something that connected earth, sky, and the depths below. Its body was the path of rivers, its scales were stars, its movements dictated seasons. It was not just a beast, but a cosmic law given flesh. When we speak of flying serpents, it is tempting to immediately recall Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of Mesoamerican myth, worshipped by cultures to the north of Nazca. But the serpent motif transcended borders. For the Nazca, too, serpents were sacred. On pottery, textiles, and geoglyphs, serpents twist and curl, often associated with fertility and the rains that allowed crops to grow. To imagine these serpents as celestial beings is not far-fetched. After all, what better way to describe the winding Milky Way than as a serpent of light slithering across the night? The Nazca may have seen in the stars a living creature, a serpent whose flight was not through air, but through eternity. Myths tell of sky gods descending, not always gentle, not always wrathful, but always powerful. They were said to ride upon thunder, to hurl lightning, to carry the life-giving rains in their wings. To appease them, the Nazca offered sacrifices, textiles, pottery, food, even blood. Some archaeologists suggest that the lines themselves were created as offerings visible to these gods, symbols so vast that they could only be understood from above. To carve a serpent stretching for hundreds of feet into the desert floor was to speak a language only the sky gods could read. Each geoglyph was a message, a prayer, a myth written not in words but in land. The serpent in particular carries profound duality. On one hand, it slithers across the ground, close to death and decay, feared for its venom and its silence. On the other, when given wings, it becomes the bridge between worlds. In Andean cosmology, such creatures often inhabited both water and sky, embodying transformation and rebirth. Some scholars believe that for the Nazca, the serpent represented not just rain, but the cycle of death and renewal itself. The desert, barren and empty, would bloom with green after the rains. Life would emerge from desolation. The flying serpent, then, was a promise that even in despair, fertility could return, that the heavens had not forgotten the earth. There are depictions of beings in Nazca art that show figures with elaborate headdresses, outstretched arms, and wings. Were these gods, shamans in ritual costume, or echoes of myths that spoke of visitors from above? The lines between mythology and memory blur. For the Nazca, to speak of gods descending from the sky was not metaphorical. It was as real as the rains returning, as the stars rising. Their rituals, performed atop desert platforms or along the lines of geoglyphs, were attempts to call these beings down, to convince them to grant life in exchange for devotion. Imagine a priest walking along a line shaped like a serpent, torchlight flickering in the night, chanting prayers. Above him, the constellation Serpens or the Milky Way coiled, as though listening. The ritual was not a performance, it was communication. And so the myths of sky gods became encoded in daily life. Farmers prayed to them for fertile fields. Leaders invoked them to legitimize power. Shamans claimed to journey upward in trance, becoming serpents themselves, flying through visions toward the gods. The desert lines, the pottery, the textiles, all became scripts for the same story, that humanity was never alone under the stars, that something watched, something judged, something could descend. The flying serpent is particularly intriguing when seen not just as myth, but as technology described through the lens of imagination. To a people without flight, what better way to describe a vehicle descending from the sky than as a serpent that could fly? Its long body, its undulating motion, its shimmering scales. These could be metaphors for machines or visitors misunderstood through myth. Many researchers, from fringe theorists to mainstream scholars, have suggested that ancient accounts of gods descending may be rooted in encounters beyond the ordinary. If so, the Nazca Lines may not simply have been offerings to imagined beings, but signals to actual watchers, meant to guide them down to specific places. The flying serpent, then, was not just a god, but a memory of something witnessed, retold until it transformed into myth. But even if we strip away such speculation, the symbolism itself is powerful. The serpent binds opposites, earth and sky, death and rebirth, destruction and fertility. In making it fly, the Nazca elevated it from fearsome predator to divine messenger. The sky gods and their serpents were not distant abstractions. They were integrated into the rhythms of survival. Each season, each cycle of rain, each unexpected drought became part of the dialogue with the heavens. The myths gave meaning to the uncontrollable, order to chaos. When rains failed, it was not random. It was the wrath of the serpent god. When the desert bloomed, it was the serpent's blessing. Standing today on the desert plateau, the geoglyphs still visible after centuries of wind and sun, one can almost feel the weight of those myths pressing into the silence. The serpent carved into the earth waits, as though expecting its celestial counterpart to return. The lines stretch outward, pathways not for humans but for gods, landing strips not for machines but for beings with wings of storm. The myths breathe through the stillness, whispering of a time when gods descended and serpents flew, when humanity believed it could call the heavens down, with lines, offerings, and stories. Perhaps that is the ultimate meaning of these myths, not simply to explain the unknown, but to bridge it. The Nazca lived in a harsh, unforgiving land. Yet, through myth, they were not abandoned. They were part of a larger story, connected to powers vast and incomprehensible. The flying serpent was the embodiment of that connection. It was the thread weaving through desert, sky, and human hope. And whether it was god, symbol, or visitor, it carried the same message, that the heavens are not silent, that something watches, and that in the lines drawn across the desert floor, humanity dares to speak back. And so, when night falls over Nazca and the stars emerge once more, the myths stir again. The Milky Way curls across the sky like the body of a serpent. Lightning flashes on the horizon as storms gather, and in the silence of the desert, one can almost hear the hiss of scales across stone, the whisper of wings across the stars, the voice of gods who descended and may yet descend again. The Nazca drew their myths into the earth so they would never be forgotten, and in doing so, they left us a message that still echoes, that the heavens are alive and the boundary between sky and earth is thinner than we think. Across the Nazca Desert, some of the most haunting features are not the shapes of animals or the spirals carved like cosmic signatures, but the long, dead straight lines that stretch for miles. Some run parallel, others intersect, and a few broaden into vast trapezoids as if deliberately cleared spaces. To a visitor standing on the ground, they seem meaningless. Just barren strips of desert where stones have been removed to reveal pale earth below. But from above, from the perspective of a bird, or something higher, they take on an entirely different character. They look eerily like runways. Wide, straight, leveled by hand across the plateau, they cut across the desert in ways that defy mere chance. This is why some have called them the first airstrips on Earth. The theory of landing strips emerged most famously with the writings of Erich von Däniken in the 1960s. In his book, Chariots of the Gods, he suggested that these lines were not religious offerings but functional surfaces, constructed for aircraft of extraterrestrial visitors. To von Däniken and his followers, the Nazca Desert was not just a ceremonial landscape, but a spaceport. The trapezoids were thought to be landing areas, the long straight lines guiding markers for descent. the vast-scale proof that they were meant to be seen from the sky. It was a theory that captured imaginations across the globe. After all, what ancient people, without writing, without wheels, would carve such immense geometric patterns unless they were designed for beings who came from above? Skeptics argue that this theory overreaches. The desert floor, while cleared of stones, is not sturdy enough to support actual craft landing upon it. The earth is too soft, the lines too fragile. And yet, the counterpoint remains. Why are some of the lines so perfectly straight over such long distances? Why do they resemble runways more than ritual paths? When viewed from satellite images, the trapezoids in particular appear flattened and elongated in a way that begs the comparison. It is difficult not to see them as surfaces prepared for something immense to touch down. Some archaeologists explain them as ritual walkways. Pilgrims would process along the lines, carrying offerings, perhaps in costumes representing deities or animals, until they reached a sacred point where rituals were enacted. Others suggest that they are pathways leading to water sources, or symbolic maps of underground aquifers that sustain life in the desert. But these explanations often lack the visceral clarity of the runway interpretation. A straight line miles long and tens of feet wide, cleared with such precision, feels excessive for processions that could have taken place on smaller scales. It is here, in the excess, that the mystery blooms. Imagine for a moment the Nazca Desert 2,000 years ago. The people, small in number, armed with simple tools, painstakingly clear away the dark stones to reveal the pale desert surface. They labor under the relentless sun, guided by some purpose that drives them to repeat this effort over and over, across generations. From the ground, they see nothing but dust and horizon. Yet above them, the lines form corridors, rectangles, and immense zones of cleared earth. If they themselves could not see the patterns fully, who were they intended for? The gods in the sky, or visitors who descended from them? The trapezoids are especially provocative. Some are as long as 2,000 feet, broadening out at one end like a funnel. To von Daniken and other ancient astronaut theorists, these shapes looked like areas for deceleration, where a craft descending from above might slow and settle. The converging lines resemble approach paths, guiding toward the landing area. To them, it was not ritual, but functionality. The Nazca had been instructed, or perhaps inspired, to build surfaces that could serve the gods who came down from the heavens. Of course, the mainstream view resists this. To archaeologists, to suggest landing strips is to step outside evidence and into speculation. And yet, the desert itself invites speculation. It is too vast, too strange, too precise to rest easily within mundane explanations. If they were ritual pathways, why make them so vast they can only be understood from the air? If they were symbols of water, why render them in such geometric abstraction rather than direct images? There is always a remainder of the mystery, something not fully explained. The runway theory also gains weight when compared to myths. The Nazca, like other Andean cultures, told stories of gods who descended from the skies, who brought knowledge and power. Serpents with wings, beings with helmets, figures with radiant light. They populate the myths not as metaphors, but as presences. If those beings truly were visitors, then perhaps the runways were not symbolic at all, but real invitations carved into the earth, places prepared for their return. The desert, flat and open, provided the perfect canvas. The lines, visible from the sky, said, "Here we are. Land here. We await you." What makes the idea both chilling and alluring is the possibility that humanity once worked not only to worship, but to serve. If the lines were truly intended as landing areas, then the Nazca were building infrastructure for others, beings from beyond. This recasts their devotion into a collaboration, or a submission. The vast effort of generations would then not just be for symbolic reasons, but for tangible encounters with sky visitors. To believe this is to accept that humanity has been in dialogue with something greater, something that demanded not temples of stone, but runways of earth. And yet, even if we do not accept the theory literally, the metaphor it offers is powerful. The Nazca Desert becomes a place of arrival, a place where heaven touches earth. Each trapezoid is a threshold, each line a signal, each cleared surface a message. In this sense, the runways may not be for machines, but for gods themselves, who needed no physical surface yet, were honored with prepared spaces. The desert became a cosmic airport, not of stone and steel, but of meaning and imagination. Today, pilots flying over Nazca still look down and see those vast straight lines, cutting across the landscape like scars of geometry. Some are so straight they remain true even when viewed across rolling hills and valleys. The precision is unnerving. One wonders how such straightness was achieved without surveying tools, without flight, without advanced engineering. Did the Nazca have methods we no longer understand? Or were they, as the runway theory suggests, replicating instructions given by beings who could see the lines from above? The desert keeps its silence. Archaeologists, engineers, theorists, and dreamers continue to debate. But the fact remains that in the Nazca Desert are immense surfaces, some broad, some narrow, carved as if to receive something not of this earth. Whether those visitors were gods, imagined beings, or actual travelers from the stars, the lines remain. They are there for anyone to see, still whispering across centuries that the earth was once marked for landing. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of the runway theory, not whether it is true in the literal sense, but that it reveals a truth about human imagination. The Nazca built surfaces of invitation, of reception, of openness to the sky. Whether for gods, for myths, or for ancient craft, they were prepared to welcome what descended. They carved into the desert not only their devotion, but their hope that they were not alone. And so today, as planes fly above and satellites photograph from space, the runways remain, still pointing upward, still awaiting the descent of something vast. Beneath the blazing silence of the Nazca Desert, a secret runs deeper than the lines carved on its surface. While most eyes are drawn to the immense geoglyphs stretching across the plateau, archaeologists have begun to realize that the greatest mystery may lie not in the sky above, but in the earth below. The Nazca lived in one of the driest places on Earth, a desert where rain is so rare that centuries can pass without a drop, and yet, somehow they survived. Somehow they thrived long enough to clear miles of Earth into patterns that would outlast their civilization. The question is, how? The answer, some suggest, may be hidden in the water that runs invisibly beneath the sand, and in the possibility that the lines themselves are more than symbols. They are maps. The Nazca people engineered something remarkable, something almost invisible until discovered by modern archaeology, the puquios. These were spiraling wells, carved like corkscrews into the desert floor, leading down to underground aquifers. From above, they appear like giant whirlpools of stone, coiling inward to a dark center. Through them, the Nazca could access water flowing far beneath the surface. Channels ran from these puquios, feeding irrigation systems that allowed crops to grow in a place where the sun seemed to forbid life. To walk among them today is to stand in awe of an ancient technology that still works, in some cases, thousands of years later. And here is where the lines on the surface meet the lifeblood below. Some researchers argue that the straight geoglyphs, rather than being cosmic runways or star charts, actually point to the locations of these hidden water sources. The lines become guides, pointing across the desert towards where one might dig or spiral down into the earth to reach water. To those who depended on the unseen flow beneath the sands, marking it on the surface was both practical and sacred. It was survival etched into the land. Yet the Nazca were not content with mere functionality. To them, water was not just liquid. It was divine. It was a gift from the gods, something to be honored, appeased, and invoked. The lines then may have been more than maps. They may have been offerings, vast pathways carved into the desert, leading toward aquifers, as if saying to the gods, "We recognize where the lifeblood of this world flows, and we honor you for granting it." In this sense, every line was both a prayer and a promise. To walk upon them, perhaps in ritual procession, was to trace the veins of the earth itself. Modern technology has added even more intrigue to this theory. With satellite imaging and LiDAR scans, researchers have discovered traces of structures buried beneath the desert surface, invisible to the naked eye. Foundations of ceremonial platforms, remnants of channels, and alignments that suggest a deeper relationship between the visible lines and the hidden landscape below. When the ground is scanned, patterns emerge that connect the geoglyphs to subterranean features, as if the Nazca were creating a mirror system. What was below reflected above. Water channels carved into the earth, and lines stretching across the surface, both forming a network of lifelines that kept the people bound to their desert. The spiral designs that appear among the geoglyphs reinforce this idea. Spirals are not only symbolic of cycles and eternity, they are also a direct visual echo of the puquios, those spiral wells that descended into hidden water. Imagine a Nazca procession tracing a spiral geoglyph on the surface, mimicking the same spiral descent into the aquifer. Ritual and practicality overlapped so seamlessly that one could not be separated from the other. To carve spirals on the desert floor was to mimic the sacred descent into the womb of the earth, where water awaited. Skeptics of the cosmic theories find reassurance here. Instead of visitors from the stars, we see the resilience of a desert people who carved their survival directly into the earth. The Nazca Lines, they argue, are not about spacecraft, but about wells, not about aliens, but about aquifers. Yet even in this interpretation, the awe does not diminish. For there is something profoundly moving in the idea that a people without writing or metal tools devised a system that connected land, sky, and underground water into a single, sacred whole. But there is a haunting possibility that blends both views. What if the Nazca intended the lines to serve two purposes at once? On the most practical level, they pointed to water, marking the desert's hidden veins. On the spiritual level, they were messages to the gods of the sky, prayers etched so large that only the heavens could truly see them. To walk upon a line may have been to participate in both, a ritual of survival and an act of worship. When archaeologists uncovered evidence of offerings buried near some of the lines, broken pottery, shells carried from the distant coast, and even fragments of textiles, they found proof that the lines were indeed sacred pathways. People did not just mark them and abandon them. They returned again and again to walk, to leave offerings, to honor. And where did these offerings often cluster? Near the puquios, near the spiral wells. The invisible lifeblood and the visible prayer intertwined. In the modern era, satellites orbiting the Earth now peer down at Nazca, just as the gods were once imagined to do. They reveal alignments invisible to us on the ground, lines that converge not randomly but toward the locations of water access points, trapezoids that stretch toward the puquios. Even geoglyphs, shaped like animals associated with water, whales for example, appear where subterranean sources may have existed. Slowly, a picture emerges of a society that mapped not only the stars, but the groundwater, weaving myth and necessity into one sacred cartography. And still, questions remain. Were the lines first conceived for practical purposes, later layered with spiritual meaning? Or were they always both, sacred from the start? Did the Nazca know that their spirals and straight lines would endure for millennia, etched into the skin of the desert long after their wells dried and their people vanished? Did they imagine that future eyes, flying in machines through the sky, would rediscover their pathways and ask, "What were you trying to tell us?" The theory of water channels and hidden structures does not strip the Nazca of mystery. It deepens it. It suggests that their genius lay not only in imagination, but in integration. They lived in a desert that demanded reverence, and they gave it, carving their gratitude and their desperation into the very ground. They marked where the hidden lifeblood flowed, and in doing so, they created one of the greatest enigmas of human history. Perhaps this is the true essence of the Nazca Lines. They are not merely star maps or runways, not only offerings or aquifer markers, but a fusion of all of these at once. They remind us that the boundaries we draw, between science and myth, between survival and ritual, between earth and sky, are not always the boundaries that ancient people recognized. To them, water was spirit, the desert was alive, and the sky was a mirror, and so they carved into the ground what they saw in both directions, a sacred geometry that connected the hidden with the infinite. Today, the desert is quiet, and the puquios still descend in their spirals to where water sometimes still flows. The lines remain etched across the surface, pointing, converging, whispering. They remind us that beneath the silence of the desert, life has always been hidden, waiting to be revealed. And above that silence, in the stars, the same question burns. Who were the Nazca truly speaking to? The gods, the earth, or us, the distant inheritors of their message? When we look upon the Nazca Lines, it is tempting to think that they are singular, unmatched, and without parallel. And in many ways, they are. Their scale, their density, their strange mix of geometry and living creatures make them one of the most profound enigmas left by antiquity. But to imagine them as completely isolated is to miss a wider truth. Across the world, On distant continents, separated by oceans and centuries, human beings have carved, scraped, and shaped the earth into colossal figures, visible only from above or across great distances. And when we place the Nazca within this global context, a pattern begins to emerge, a pattern of humanity itself reaching upward, outward, into eternity. To the north of the Nazca Desert, in the barren expanse of Chile, lies another enigma etched into the earth, the Atacama Giant. Towering 390 feet long, it is the largest prehistoric anthropomorphic geoglyph in the world. Its body, with outstretched arms and crowned head, dominates the hillside. Archaeologists believe it may represent a deity, perhaps linked to fertility or astronomy. Like the Nazca, the makers of the Atacama Giant lived in a desert where survival was precarious. And like the Nazca, they chose to carve into the earth something that was meant not for human eyes, at ground level, but for the heavens. From the sky or from distant hills, the giant comes alive, gazing upward, perhaps as a guardian of the stars, travel far across the Atlantic to England. And you find another mystery carved into the earth, the Uffington White Horse. This enormous figure of a galloping horse stretches across the rolling hills of Oxfordshire, its chalk lines gleaming white against the green. Dating back perhaps 3,000 years, the horse was created by cutting trenches into the hillside and filling them with crushed white chalk. Like the Nazca Lines, it is best seen from a distance, its form incomprehensible up close. Why a horse? Some say it was a tribal symbol, others that it represented a solar deity, its body galloping across the heavens. Its visibility from the sky makes it eerily resonant with the Nazca tradition, as if humans, oceans apart, shared the same impulse, to speak to something above through images drawn upon the earth. In the deserts of California, near Blythe, another set of geoglyphs stretch across the barren ground. Known as the Blythe intaglios, these immense human and animal figures were scraped into the desert floor, much like the Nazca Lines. One depicts a human with outstretched arms, another an animal that may be a mountain lion or a coyote. These figures, created by native peoples perhaps 1,000 years ago, remain visible today, though they were only rediscovered in the 20th century, just as the Nazca Lines were revealed by modern flight. Their purpose remains debated. Ceremonial grounds, clan symbols, or messages to the gods. Whatever the answer, they show that the act of inscribing the earth with colossal figures is not unique to Peru, but a broader expression of human spirituality. Journey again to the vast lands of Australia, and you encounter the Mare Man. This enormous geoglyph, over 2 miles long, depicts a human figure holding what appears to be a boomerang or staff. Unlike the ancient Nazca or Uffington carvings, the Mare Man was discovered only in 1998, and its origins remain shrouded in mystery. Some believe it was created by Aboriginal traditions, others that it is a modern construction made to mimic ancient geoglyphs. Regardless, its scale and visibility from above echo the same principles, to turn the land into a canvas so vast that only skyborne eyes could appreciate it. And these are not isolated. Across the Middle East, archaeologists have uncovered desert kites, vast stone lines stretching for miles, thought to be hunting traps, but whose shapes from the air resemble geometric figures. In Scandinavia, Bronze Age rock carvings depict animals and ships, positioned on cliffs as though meant to be seen from afar. In South America beyond Nazca, other cultures carved figures into the desert floor, though none with such density. What unites them all is not just the technique of carving into earth, but the vision to make something whose full meaning only emerges when seen from above or across great spans of time. So why this impulse? Why would peoples, separated by oceans and centuries, all choose to inscribe the land with images too vast to be comprehended up close? Perhaps it is because the act itself was a declaration of scale. To make something that cannot be fully seen by those who stand upon it is to admit that the work is not for human eyes alone. It is for gods, for spirits, for ancestors, or for eternity itself. It is an act of communication that bypasses the mundane, reaching instead into the infinite. Consider the Nazca hummingbird, its wings stretched across the desert. Now place it alongside the Uffington horse, galloping across the chalk hills, or the blithe human figure raising its arms to the heavens. Different creatures, different continents, yet all sharing the same posture of offering, stretching outward, upward, visible to powers beyond human sight. Did these cultures ever meet? Likely not. But did they share the same human yearning? Absolutely. A yearning to speak not just to each other, but to whatever lay in the sky above. And perhaps there is another layer. These geoglyphs, immense and enduring, make the land itself into a text. They transform Earth into scripture, a message that survives long after languages vanish and cities crumble. We may never read the full sentence, but we recognize its intent: to be remembered, to be seen, to be acknowledged by forces greater than ourselves. Standing in the Nazca Desert, one can imagine the same questions echoing across the world. Did the builders of the Atacama Giant look upward, waiting for gods to descend? Did the creators of the Uffington horse believe it would gallop forever across the heavens? Did the artists of Blythe raise their arms in desert ceremony, tracing their figures on the ground as they danced upon them? Each geoglyph is both unique to its culture and universal to humanity. Today, satellites orbiting Earth can see them all. The Nazca Lines, the White Horse, the Blythe figures, the Atacama Giant. From this vantage point, their unity becomes clear. They are not isolated enigmas, but chapters in a global story of human beings inscribing the land to reach the sky. Whether to gods, to spirits, or to eternity, the message is the same. We were here. We mattered. We looked upward. And so, when we compare the Nazca to the geoglyphs worldwide, the mystery deepens. It is not just one culture in one desert leaving a puzzle for us to unravel. It is humanity itself, echoing across continents, saying in one vast voice, "We are small, but our symbols can be enormous. We are fleeting, but our marks can endure forever. We cannot touch the stars, but we can draw them upon the earth, and in doing so, perhaps, bring heaven and earth a little closer together." Imagine standing at the edge of the Nazca Desert, where the horizon stretches endlessly and the sun burns the earth into shades of copper and gold. Before you lies a line, straight, purposeful, extending further than the eye can follow. To us, it appears as a mark in the sand, but to the ancient Nazca people, it may have been something far more profound. These lines were not just drawings for the heavens. They may have been paths for human feet, sacred corridors carved into the desert to be walked, traced, and experienced. For the Nazca, movement itself could have been prayer. The act of walking these lines was not about reaching a destination, but about entering a state of communion with the earth, with the sky, and with the divine. Archaeologists have discovered fragments of pottery, broken intentionally, scattered along many of the lines. These shards were not accidents of history. They were offerings. Bowls smashed at the edges of geoglyphs suggest ritual acts, symbolic sacrifices to unseen gods. The desert became an altar without walls, and the lines its sacred architecture. To walk them was to step into the threshold between the human and the divine, a pilgrimage not to a shrine of stone, but to an invisible presence above. Imagine hundreds of worshippers moving slowly across the desert, their footsteps pressing prayers into the earth, their shadows merging with the geometry of the lines. Some lines stretched toward the distant Andes, pointing like arrows to mountains considered sacred by the Nazca. In Andean cosmology, mountains, or apis, were living beings, repositories of spirit, givers of water. To walk along a line that ended at a mountain was to journey toward a god, a pilgrimage that connected the parched desert with the promise of rain. Other lines seemed to terminate at ancient puquios, spiral wells that tapped underground aquifers. Water, the most precious resource in the desert, was no mere commodity. It was divine sustenance, a blessing that kept life possible in one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. Thus, the lines may have guided processions toward these wells, where ceremonies would honor the forces that brought water from the unseen depths to the surface. But these processions were not ordinary walks. They were rituals embedded in movement itself. The Nazca may have believed that by physically tracing the lines with their feet, they were reenacting cosmic stories or invoking balance in the universe. Each step was intentional, each pathway a prayer written by the body. Imagine dancers moving in unison along the wings of the hummingbird, their motions echoing the flapping of a celestial creature. Picture priests leading processions down vast geometric corridors, pausing at intersections where offerings were placed, their chants rising into the desert air. The lines were not just to be seen from above, they were to be felt underfoot, embodied in the rhythm of walking and ritual. Pilgrimage is a theme that echoes across human cultures. From the Camino de Santiago in Spain to the ancient roads leading to Mecca, From Hindu yatras in India to the Incan seques that radiated from Cusco, humans have always walked to sanctify the bond between themselves and the divine. The Nazca Lines may represent one of the oldest and most haunting expressions of this universal practice. Instead of building towering temples, the Nazca made the desert itself their temple, and the act of traversing its vastness became the liturgy. No walls were needed because the horizon was infinite. No roof was needed because the heavens themselves were the ceiling of their cathedral. Consider how different this makes the lines appear. We often think of them as static images to be decoded. But what if they were dynamic, living rituals? What if the meaning of a line emerged not when viewed from the sky, but when it was walked by dozens of feet, year after year, generation after generation? The desert became a stage, and the people its actors, reenacting cosmic dramas written on the earth. The images, spiders, monkeys, whales, may have been guides for ritual performances, each creature embodying a myth or celestial counterpart. Walking the lines meant entering the myth, collapsing the boundary between human story and divine order. There is evidence that some lines were not merely geometric, but formed labyrinthine paths designed to lead participants into and out of symbolic journeys. Walking them may have mirrored the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, or the transition from drought to rain. The desert was not an empty wasteland, but a landscape inscribed with meaning, where each step carried the weight of ancient prayer. Even the silence of the desert may have been part of the ritual, an acoustic vastness where chants and flutes echoed into infinity, reinforcing the sense of contact with the divine. And perhaps there was also a communal dimension. Pilgrimage along the lines may have drawn together families, clans, or entire communities. Imagine the gatherings, people carrying offerings, food, instruments, converging on the desert plain for ceremonies that lasted days. Fires burning at night, dancers tracing the outlines of geoglyphs, shamans interpreting the stars overhead, while feet retraced the sacred corridors below. These were not isolated acts, but communal performances that reaffirmed identity, solidarity, and the shared bond between human and cosmos. Modern imaging technology has revealed intersections where multiple lines converge, like nodes in a network. These may have been gathering points, ritual crossroads where offerings were deposited and ceremonies performed. At such junctures, the desert became a nexus of meaning, where pathways converged as if mirroring constellations in the sky. Walking along one line may have been part of a greater circuit, a pilgrimage route that connected multiple geoglyphs, mountains, and wells in a sacred geography only fully understood by the Nazca themselves. The sheer effort required to maintain these lines also suggests a ritual commitment. The desert winds could easily cover the etchings, but the Nazca preserved them century after century. Why? Because to them, the lines were alive. They were not static symbols, but active presences that needed to be honored, refreshed, and walked. Maintaining them was part of the ritual cycle, as necessary as planting crops or drawing water. To neglect the lines would have been to break faith with the gods who sustained them. From this perspective, the Nazca Lines were not messages sent outward to unknown visitors. They were dialogues with the divine woven into the rhythms of daily and seasonal life. When rains were scarce, the people walked the lines to invoke the sky. When harvests came, they walked the lines in gratitude. In times of transition, birth, or death, the lines offered pathways into cosmic balance. The desert became an interactive map, not of stars alone, but of sacred journeys binding people to the forces that governed their survival. And yet, when viewed from above, we see that these rituals were not confined to the human scale. The gods themselves, or perhaps visitors from beyond, could look down and witness the processions, the offerings, the human figures moving across the desert canvas. In that sense, the rituals were dual, acts of devotion performed for both the heavens and the people themselves. Walking the lines was both prayer and performance, both sacrifice and celebration. When we place the Nazca rituals within the wider human story, we see again how universal this impulse is. Pilgrims still walk roads today, tracing paths sanctified by tradition, their feet echoing prayers into the earth. The Nazca were not so different from us. They too sought meaning in movement, sacredness in footsteps, communion in shared journeys. Their desert cathedral may have lacked stone walls, but it possessed something greater, the vastness of the horizon, the infinite embrace of the sky, and the enduring lines that still wait, millennia later, to be walked again. And so, when we look upon the Nazca Lines as mere images, we see only part of the truth. But when we imagine them as pathways of pilgrimage, their meaning expands. They become not static enigmas, but living rituals, sacred routes walked by countless generations, each step a prayer written into the earth. The desert remembers those footsteps. The lines remain. And perhaps, if we listen closely, we can still hear the echoes of those pilgrimages, the sound of devotion stretching across time, unbroken, eternal. In the windswept silence of the Peruvian desert, the Nazca Lines stretch across the earth like scars carved into time itself. They defy erosion, they resist oblivion, and they whisper a question that lingers far beyond the boundaries of archaeology. What if they are not merely the creations of one people, but fragments of something older, echoes of civilizations lost to history, cultures whose names we no longer remember? The possibility of forgotten ancestors haunts these lines. For every answer offered, another mystery rises. Why were they made, and who first envisioned them? The Nazca culture flourished between 200 BCE and 600 CE, but many researchers suspect the lines themselves may contain layers of history that predate the Nazca entirely. Some of the oldest lines are nothing more than simple straight paths, cutting across the desert floor, with no obvious connection to the grand figures that came later. Were these the first attempts of the Nazca? Or were they inheritances? Traces left by a people whose story has been erased by time, but whose knowledge lingered like an echo, guiding later hands to expand, reinterpret, and transform them into the massive figures we marvel at today? The desert preserves everything, but it also obscures origins. In its silence, the possibility of a lost precursor civilization waits like a shadow. Legends across the Andes speak of ancestral beings, teachers who came before, who carried knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and engineering. The Inca, centuries after the Nazca, told stories of Viracocha, the great creator god who emerged from Lake Titicaca, traveling the world to teach humanity before vanishing into the Pacific Ocean. Some accounts describe Viracocha as accompanied by followers, strange figures who seemed foreign to those who remembered them. Could such myths be distant memories of an advanced culture that left traces in the landscape? Traces like the Nazca Lines, which outlived their makers and were absorbed into new traditions. When explorers first flew over the desert in the 20th century and saw the geoglyphs from the sky, many were quick to invoke the idea of Atlantis or Lemuria, mythic lost continents where ancient civilizations thrived with knowledge now forgotten. These theories were often dismissed as fantasy, but their persistence reveals something. The human recognition that the Nazca Lines seemed disproportionate to the tools and scale of the Nazca themselves. How could a people without flight conceive of images only visible from the heavens? How could such precision emerge without instruments of measurement, without maps, without aerial perspective? To believers in lost civilizations, the answer lies in inheritance. Perhaps the Nazca were the custodians of older knowledge, fragments passed down like broken pieces of a puzzle from cultures that no longer exist. Across the world, there are parallels that deepen this suspicion. In Bolivia, at the site of Tiwanaku, near Lake Titicaca, megalithic blocks weighing hundreds of tons were quarried and moved with methods we still cannot replicate with certainty. The people who later occupied the site could not explain its origins, attributing it to earlier forgotten builders. In Egypt, the Great Sphinx seems older than the pyramids that surround it, weathered by rains long before the desert became what it is today. In Mesopotamia, Sumerian legends speak of gods descending with knowledge, establishing the first cities. When seen through this lens, the Nazca Lines become part of a global pattern, a recurring theme of monuments that outlast their makers. Monuments that point back to a possibility of advanced, lost civilizations whose memory survives only as myth. But perhaps it was not technological advancement that mattered most. Perhaps it was a different kind of knowledge, an ability to bind the rhythms of the earth and sky into symbolic systems we can barely comprehend. Some scholars suggest that the Nazca inherited ritual landscapes already charged with meaning, repurposing older sacred lines into their own cosmology. The straight lines could be remnants of archaic pilgrimage paths, maintained and elaborated upon over centuries until they became the intricate figures we see today. In this way, the Nazca Lines could be less a singular creation and more a palimpsest, a layered record of generations of ritual practice stretching back into prehistory, each culture adding to what came before. If this is true, then the lines may preserve the footsteps not of one civilization, but of many, each now lost to time except for the faint traces carved into the desert. And yet, there are stranger interpretations. Some argue that the Nazca Lines resemble not only constellations, but also global navigation systems, maps etched into the earth as if to be read by travelers from the skies. To these theorists, the idea of lost civilizations merges with something more radical, the possibility that humanity has forgotten entire epochs of contact with beings from beyond, encounters that seeded myths of gods, sky serpents, and teacher figures. The lost civilization in this interpretation may not have been entirely human, or at least not entirely bound to the same world we inhabit today. Such theories, though controversial, reveal the magnetic power of the lines. They demand explanation, and when ordinary explanations fall short, extraordinary ones rush in to fill the silence. Even within the boundaries of archaeology, the lines connect to lost possibilities. We know little about the Nazca themselves, their writing absent, their voices silenced by time. When their culture declined around 600 CE, perhaps due to drought or ecological collapse, the rituals tied to the lines faded too. But the desert kept the markings, stripping away the people while preserving their symbols. This silence makes them feel orphaned, detached from context, like messages cut loose from their authors. And in that void, our minds project, imagining not only who the Nazca were, but who might have come before them. The lines are less like art and more like memory itself, fragile and incomplete, carrying forward just enough to provoke but never enough to resolve. What is it in us that yearns for lost civilizations? Why do we search for Atlantis beneath every unexplained monument, or hear echoes of Lemuria in every myth? Perhaps it is because we sense that history is not a straight line, but a vast, uneven terrain filled with peaks of knowledge and valleys of forgetting. Perhaps we recognize in the Nazca Lines the fingerprints of that forgetting, a monument that resists explanation, urging us to remember that human history is not complete, that there are chapters missing, erased by drought, flood, and time. The Nazca Lines become a mirror for this longing, a canvas on which we project the great absence of forgotten ancestors. And so, standing in the desert today, you are not only gazing at lines carved by the Nazca, you are staring into a portal that connects to something deeper, older, hidden. Maybe the Nazca were the artists, or maybe they were the inheritors of an inheritance so old it was no longer understood, only preserved. Maybe these lines are messages not for us, but from a civilization that vanished, trusting the earth to remember when humans would not. Or perhaps the truth is simpler, and yet no less profound, that the Nazca Lines remind us that civilizations themselves are fragile, that what we build may one day be misunderstood, misinterpreted, or absorbed into the myths of those who come after us. We may never know whether the lines were born entirely from the Nazca imagination, or whether they are the last visible traces of a culture that time itself has buried. But the very possibility of lost civilizations turns the desert into something more than a puzzle. It becomes a mausoleum of memory, an open question carved into the skin of the earth. Every straight path, every spiral, every animal etched into stone and sand may be a surviving thread from a tapestry we can no longer see in full. The lines endure, not just as geoglyphs, but as symbols of history's greatest mystery. That what we think we know is always incomplete, that beneath the surface of the known world lies the silence of civilizations forgotten. In the endless silence of the Nazca Desert, the geoglyphs lie untouched, their lines etched like veins across the skin of the earth. They have lasted for centuries, shielded not by walls or guards, but by the desert itself, by the fragile crust of stone and sand that resists erosion, yet records every scar of intrusion. Today, however, another barrier protects them, one made not of natural silence, but of human law. Government restrictions on excavation have wrapped the Nazca Lines in a cloak of preservation, and with it, a shroud of secrecy. Every shovel withheld, every trench forbidden, every denied permit deepens the mystery. What is the world not allowed to know about what lies beneath? The Peruvian government, along with UNESCO, has declared the Nazca Lines a World Heritage Site. That status comes with strict protection. Archaeologists cannot dig freely, cannot probe recklessly, cannot disturb the desert without layers of authorization that are rarely granted. The desert's surface is so delicate that even a single footprint can remain visible for hundreds of years. A car tire, a careless excavation, or the weight of construction can obliterate the balance that has preserved these figures for millennia. Authorities insist the restrictions are necessary to protect the lines not just from damage, but from erasure. Yet, as with all mysteries, limits placed on knowledge ignite suspicion. For every law that shields the lines, there is a rumor that what lies beneath must be extraordinary. There are whispers of hidden chambers, buried offerings, and water channels concealed beneath the desert floor. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed anomalies, straight features, cavities, and patterns invisible from the surface. Some scholars believe these may be ancient irrigation systems, proof that the lines were not just spiritual, but practical, connected to survival in the desert. Yet, excavation that might confirm this remains largely forbidden. Official explanations cite the fragility of the terrain, the danger of irreparable damage, and the duty to preserve heritage intact. But in the absence of answers, speculation grows. Are officials protecting the lines, or are they protecting the knowledge of what lies beneath them? The restrictions extend even to those who approach the lines. Visitors are limited to observation towers, guided tours, or aerial flights. Walking upon the figures themselves is prohibited. Satellite images and drone footage are allowed, but close excavation remains taboo. The paradox is haunting. The lines, which seem to demand human engagement, which invite interpretation and decoding, are kept out of reach by the very rules meant to safeguard them. And the more they are sealed away, the more the imagination fills the void. History fuels this suspicion. The Nazca Lines have suffered damage before, not just from natural forces, but from people. Looters seeking buried treasures once dug shallow pits near the figures, sometimes finding pottery, textiles, and offerings buried in the sand. Farmers and miners have scarred the lines by accident or indifference. Even modern projects have left their wounds. In 2014, activists from Greenpeace entered a restricted area to lay out a protest banner near the hummingbird geoglyph, leaving footprints that scarred the desert floor. The outrage that followed reinforced the government's stance. No one can be trusted to walk upon the lines, let alone dig beneath them. Preservation requires restriction. But preservation also feeds the narrative of secrecy. Some conspiratorial voices insist that the restrictions exist not merely to prevent damage, but to prevent discovery. They argue that if excavation were permitted, researchers might uncover evidence that rewrites history. Advanced water channels that reveal forgotten engineering, ritual sites that suggest contact with distant civilizations, or even chambers containing artifacts too extraordinary to fit within the accepted timeline of human development. To them, government restrictions are not protection, but censorship, an attempt to control the story of the past. And in truth, governments have often shaped archaeological narratives to suit national pride, political agendas, or economic interests. Why not here, in the desert of Nazca, where the stakes are global? Yet, the reality may be both simpler and more profound. The desert is a fragile archive. To excavate is to destroy, even if only partially. Archaeology itself is a paradox. In uncovering the past, it disturbs the very context that preserved it. Once soil is moved, once artifacts are lifted from the earth, they can never be returned to their original silence. The government's refusal to grant widespread excavation rights may be an act of restraint, a recognition that the mystery of the Nazca Lines is worth more preserved than explained. In this sense, the restrictions serve as a kind of ritual themselves, an enforced reverence, a demand that humanity wait, respect, and approach the mystery with humility. Still, the lines themselves provoke longing. To stand before them is to want to know more, to dig, to peel back the surface and uncover what has been hidden for centuries. The government's restrictions place that desire forever out of reach, and in doing so, they transform the lines from monuments of the past into battlegrounds of interpretation. Each theory, astronomical, ritual, hydraulic, or extraterrestrial, thrives precisely because no excavation can silence it. The law enshrines the mystery, ensuring that the Nazca Lines remain forever suspended between knowledge and speculation. The irony is sharp. The Nazca people themselves may have walked these lines freely, offered gifts upon them, traced them during rituals, even dug shallow pits to leave sacrifices for the gods. For them, the lines were not restricted. They were living pathways. Today, however, the pathways are closed, frozen beneath layers of law, their role transformed from sacred avenues into protected relics. What was once alive has been embalmed in preservation, and that embalming fuels the sense of loss, the sense that something is being hidden from us. In the end, government restrictions on excavation embody the tension that defines the Nazca Lines themselves. They are at once protective and provocative, reverent and suspicious. They ensure that the lines will remain, etched into the desert for centuries to come. But they also ensure that the mystery will remain unsolved, a riddle that can be seen but not touched, studied but not pierced. And perhaps this is the truest legacy of the lines, not as messages to be fully decoded, but as eternal invitations to wonder, invitations safeguarded by the very laws that frustrate our curiosity. When you look upon the Nazca Lines, you are not only seeing what was carved by ancient hands, you are seeing the silence enforced by modern authority, the barrier that keeps you forever at the edge of knowing. Whether that silence conceals nothing or everything, we may never know. But one truth endures: the Nazca Desert holds its secrets tightly, and the world is not yet permitted to break them open. In the quiet of the Nazca Desert, where the sun bleaches the earth and the winds seem to whisper across centuries, the lines stretch outward into the horizon like veins of memory carved into stone. They are not simply remnants of a forgotten culture. They are still here, still vast, still intact, still gazing skyward with silent intent. And so, the question presses against the mind like a stone weight. Could these lines still serve their original purpose? Or has that purpose already been fulfilled, their message already sent, their rituals already closed? To even ask the question is to return to the heart of the mystery. If the lines were celestial calendars meant to track the sun and the stars, then the cosmos has not changed in its eternal cycles. The sun still rises over the Andes, still sets into the Pacific, still marks the solstices and equinoxes with unerring precision. The constellations still wheel across the night sky. Orion still rises, the Pleiades still shimmer. Could the lines still function then, as the tools of time they once may have been? A farmer standing at the edge of the desert today, with patient eyes and ancient memory, might still read the heavens as the Nazca once did. He could still see where the sun's shadow intersects a line, still know the moment to sow seeds or harvest crops. The desert may seem barren, but the knowledge etched upon it is not dead. If the lines were pilgrimage routes, sacred walkways traced by priests, dancers, and supplicants, could they not still be walked today? The sand remembers the weight of ancient feet. The air remembers the chanting voices. Though the Peruvian government forbids the passage now, to protect the fragile crust, in theory the pathways remain intact. They still lead toward distant mountains, toward Huacas, toward the horizon where the earth meets the stars. They could still be walked in reverence, step by step, the body becoming the ritual instrument that joins land and sky. In the imagination you can feel it even now, your bare feet pressing against the hot desert surface, your arms lifted to the sky, your body becoming part of the living line. The desert still holds the capacity to transform movement into prayer. If the lines were offerings to sky gods, messages meant to be read from above, then their purpose is not diminished by time. From the sky, they remain clear, distinct, almost defiant against erosion. Planes and satellites, even astronauts orbiting far above, can see them still. The gods of the Nazca may have faded into forgotten names, but the possibility of being observed from above has only grown more real. If extraterrestrial beings once looked down upon these deserts, if messengers from the heavens once saw in these lines a communication carved by human devotion, then the signal still stands, still waiting, still visible to any gaze that might return. Even now, as human eyes from the International Space Station sweep across South America, the Nazca Lines whisper upward. We are still here. We are still calling. If the lines were maps of water, conduits toward hidden aquifers, their purpose may be less mystical, but no less urgent. The desert is still dry, water still scarce, survival still dependent upon the ability to find and channel it. Archaeologists who detect underground channels and puquios near the lines believe the geoglyphs were interwoven with a water cult, prayers carved into the earth itself. Could they still serve this function? Perhaps yes. The lines may still point toward places where water once flowed, where ancient people dug spirals and canals. In a world where climate change deepens drought and shifts rainfall, the desert's old markings could still hold lessons, still guide engineers and archaeologists toward forgotten solutions. The lines may be both memory and blueprint, a voice of the past that could yet sustain the present. And yet, there is a deeper possibility. Perhaps the original purpose of the lines was never meant to expire, never meant to be finished. Perhaps their purpose was timeless, to remind human beings that they are not alone, not confined to the dust beneath their feet, but connected to the cosmos itself. Each figure, the spider, the monkey, the hummingbird, is a mirror of something greater, a reflection of patterns in the stars, of myths that stretch beyond the horizon. The very act of carving them into the desert may have been an eternal gesture, a way of saying, we exist, we witness, we reach. In that sense, the lines are still serving their purpose. Every time a plane flies overhead, every time a tourist gasps in wonder, every time a researcher measures their dimensions with reverent care, the lines continue their work. They are still calling minds upward, outward, beyond the self. Perhaps the lines were never meant for the gods alone. Perhaps they were also meant for us. For future generations, for eyes that would see them centuries later, for hearts that would tremble at their endurance. If so, then their purpose continues each time we ask questions, each time we wonder, each time we resist the urge to dismiss them as mere decoration. The lines are performing their function still. They are igniting awe, compelling us to look up, to look inward, to remember that mystery is part of existence. Could the lines still serve their original purpose? The answer depends on how we define that purpose. If it was purely agricultural, perhaps yes, though modern technology has supplanted it. If it was ritual, perhaps yes, though modern laws prevent it. If it was cosmic, perhaps yes, for the stars remain, eternal and unchanging. If it was spiritual, perhaps yes, for humans still need to believe, still need to connect, still need to lift their gaze beyond the horizon. The Nazca Desert still whispers to those who listen, still holds its power for those who dare to see. In the end, maybe the lines serve a purpose that transcends their original intent. They serve the purpose of wonder, of silence, of humility before the unknown. They serve as guardians of mystery in a world that rushes too quickly toward answers. They remind us that sometimes the most important thing is not to solve, but to preserve, not to decode, but to feel. And as long as they stand, etched into the desert like veins of the earth itself, they will always serve that purpose. The Nazca Lines endure. They endure because they are not just ancient carvings, not just relics, not just puzzles. They are living questions, still active, still resonant, still waiting. They still do what they always have done. They lift the human heart toward the heavens and remind us that we are more than dust. And in that sense, yes, they still serve their original purpose, perhaps even more now than ever before.